Squad 7.2 just released, and with this update, we get a ton of stuff, including a couple new vehicles, some big gunplay updates, a massive list of bug fixes, and a significant change in the form of map and unit voting. So if you are new to the channel, hit the subscribe button, leave a like, and drop a comment down below with your thoughts on this update. And let's dive into this because we have a whole bunch to cover. First, let's talk about gunplay updates, and if you watch my playtest video, you'll have some idea of what to expect. So the first thing to note is that there is support for manual bolting. Using bolt action rifles, firing will no longer automatically cycle the bolt. The player must press the fire button again to manually cycle. So this gives you the opportunity to actually see where your shot impacts before cycling the bolt. Next up, the aim sensitivity is reduced when using steady aim, which is holding shift while you're aiming. The sensitivity multiplier can be adjusted or disabled in the game settings menu. We also get a reduction in scope bobbing from weapon sway. OWI says this makes keeping the target in view through the scope easier and can help prevent motion sickness in some players. Now this is a visual change and doesn't actually reduce weapon sway. So it sounds to me like this is more a polish up of that experience when you're aiming down your scope. Now another big adjustment that we talked about in the playtest video I did recently is the clear sights and how that operates. So the clear sights view is only going to be activated when stamina is lower, whereas you will have a better perspective through the sights when stamina is higher. That's some bigger overall changes. Let's talk about some more specific changes. First of all, the SV98, the Mosin, and the C14 rifles have adjusted recoil so that players can actually see the point of impact. Sway has been reworked on several weapons, including the G3, the FAL, the SKS, and the RPD. It also appears that they have made some adjustments to some iron sights, as well as adding suppression for the 40mm rifle grenade projectiles and launched smoke rounds. There's also been some general gameplay updates that you should be aware of. First of all, the helicopter respawn time has been increased from 6 minutes to 10 minutes. Starting tickets for Advanced and Secure and Random Advanced and Secure have been unified to 250 instead of 300. The starting tickets for Invasion have also been unified to 200 for attackers, 800 for defenders. However, on Amphibious Assault Invasion layers, it has been increased from 200 to 250 for the attacker team. Now, there's also some vehicle changes implemented. For example, the Leopard has a new sight. The acceleration of the USMC AAVP has been adjusted. And the BTR-80 and BTR-82 chassis is no longer going to take damage from fragmentation rounds. There's plenty of other changes, and I'll put a link down below with the full list if you want to dive in deeper. Now, we are getting two new US vehicles, starting with the M1128 mobile gun system. This is a Striker chassis with a 105mm cannon on top. It's going to be able to pack a decent amount of punch with a limited amount of ammo, but of course it can't take too much in return. I'm excited to see how folks utilize this vehicle. The next thing we're going to get is a quad bike. This is going to be for the US Army and USMC light infantry units. This can hold 2 people and a little bit of ammunition on board. I think this is going to end up being a very misused item in the game because I see a ton of value here and that you can sneak behind enemy lines, drop a rally, get your squad spawning back there, and really create chaos because this thing is going to be fast and pretty stealthy. So next up, we need to spend some time talking about the map and faction voting system. This is a really big change and it's much more robust than you might think. So let's try to break it down like this. There's a Google sheet currently available that breaks down the different factions and units that you can have per map choice. So first, it's important to know that factions are aligned with different factions. For example, you have Blue 4 factions, which are going to include Canada, the US, British, and so on. You have your independent factions, which are going to include the IMF, the Insurgents, the Middle East Alliance, and the Turkish Land Forces. Then you have your PAC Alliance, which is just, for now, the PLA. And you'll notice there seems to be a new PLA sub-faction presented in this breakdown. Additionally, you get Red 4, which includes the Russian Ground Forces and the VDV. All the maps in Squad are based in different biomes. And based on how this map voting system is going to work, biomes will actually dictate what factions are available to that map. This will affect primarily independent Red 4 and PAC availability. So for example, on Goose Bay, you have all Blue 4 availability in terms of the factions that can be chosen for one side, whereas you have no independent factions available to choose for Goose Bay. But you do have both Red 4 options in the VDV Russian Ground Forces and all the PLA factions. But this goes even further because now all the factions are broken up into unit types, including air assault, armored, combined arms, light infantry, mechanized, motorized, support, or amphibious assault. Different factions are going to have different unit types available to them. So while the British Armed Forces don't have an amphibious assault group, they do have a support group, whereas the United States Marine Corps does not have a support group, but they do have a unit type for amphibious assault. Now, all of these units actually have some background written up that OWI has provided, so there's a little bit of lore attached to how this is set up. And as it filters down, it does seem that certain maps will have certain faction units available to that map. But what's even more significant from round to round is how the faction units chosen will affect gameplay. So for example, many of the Blue 4 air assault unit types only have one tank that is on a 30-minute timer, but they do get 3 helicopters and an additional ATGM per fob. Whereas if you looked at the combined arms unit faction types, you're going to get a slightly different variation on what's deployable, including 1 tank on a 15-minute timer, 2 helicopters, and 1 ATGM per fob. Now, one other curveball thrown in here is that some factions have a support unit type. That support unit type gets the opportunity to place 2 HABs per fob. So now that is not just limited to insurgents as a capability. This makes the map voting system pretty robust, and it's going to affect the way your team can operate on any given layer or map. This gives a lot more control to the players in the lobby at that given time to make selections and figure out how to counter another team on that specific layer. Now, I know there's been some concerns about sort of repetitive play over certain maps and certain factions getting repeated and not really playing some of the other factions due to this change, but server owners actually have a bunch of control over how this operates. They can set certain parameters for how it's going to run. They can even disable it if they want. And of course, there are cooldowns in place that they can set to keep and prevent layers or factions from being repetitively chosen. However, this does mix things up a little bit. Of course, there's concerns over what your team might pick. Maybe they're picking the weaker faction for a given layer or a given matchup. So to some extent, you're going to have to pick up on some of these new layers. Thankfully, they are displayed like you just saw in the map voting process, along with the information tied to each faction so you can make some sort of educated decision. But what I thought was neat was ending up on an Al-Bazar invasion layer. And typically, you're going to have like a Blue 4 faction maybe invading against the insurgent faction. But instead, we got an Al-Bazar invasion where we were playing the Russian airborne forces against the USMC. So we spent some time in a BMD-4 and we didn't have to worry about IEDs, but we were actually worried about ATGMs being everywhere. It was just a neat combination of factions for that layer. So overall, I think this gives a lot of variety in the faction matchups on different maps, but more specifically, the unit types and how the unit types are going to function on these different layers or maps. Now, in addition to all the things I've already talked about, there were a ton of bug fixes in this update. OWI did me a favor, and in their patch notes, they actually selected some top bugs that they were able to take care of, so let's take a look at those. And I'll put the full list down in the description below. The first one is reduced and smoothed out apparent movement stutters or hitches on helicopter movement when flying close to busy areas. The second one is fix an issue where explosive, sound effects, or visual effects and damage could be desynced from one another or playing out of order. This is just one of those immersive things that you want polished up. The next one is where RPGs are sometimes not loaded following the reload animation. That appears to be fixed, so our anti-tank folks will be pretty stoked. Fixed an issue where IEDs could be detonated multiple times. I'm sure that is a nice thing to have removed. They also fixed an issue with the vehicle passenger list where players who weren't in the vehicle were listed as passengers, something I've seen multiple times in my own gameplay. Another fix that will please armor players is they fixed an issue where vehicles with turrets could take double damage from projectiles penetrating the hull and turret components. There's also been some fix to the server browser system. Next up, there's also a fix in place for where living players could appear dead on the map, scoreboard, or squad list, something I've also seen pretty often. And now mines will now despawn when an individual changes team. So while there's over 100 bug fixes in total, there's a couple more I want to point out that's not on this top 10 list. One is that they fixed an issue where minor aiming adjustments in some vehicles, turrets, or emplacements were actually drifting, stuttering, or locking in place. I'm listing this first because I actually thought multiple times that maybe my mouse was broken. OWI also fixed an issue where a bandage gets used when a player is incapacitated during bandaging, which will allow you to hold on to your bandage if you can get a medic to come pick you up. And finally, they fixed an issue with the USMC LAV-25 and the Canadian Armed Forces Coyote had thin armor and could pass damage onto the hull. If you watch my playtest video, you know that some of the mains have been changed for many of these maps to accommodate the different vehicles that are going to be incorporated on some of these layers. I've also seen a refresh to one of the mains in the north part of Al Basra, giving that main a little bit more cover if you're rolling out. And there seems to be some map updates. Two that I've seen so far would be Al Basra and Yaharifka. And I can't miss the fact that we also got a new weapon skin in the form of the jungle pack for the PLA faction. And there's been an update to existing skins. In fact, you may find that some of the weapons you may have already purchased weapon skins for actually have a variation of them that is worn down. So finally, let's talk about my overall thoughts. I haven't had a ton of time to play with this update, but I'm very curious to see how many of these layers and map voting opportunities play out with more rounds. I was a little bit more concerned that implementation might cause some issues, but so far from what I've seen, it seems stable. But this, in addition to some of the gunplay changes and the massive list of bug fixes, I think makes this update one of the biggest updates I've seen in recent memory for Squad. Any one of the major areas of this update, including the map voting, some of the new vehicles, or some of the gunplay changes that are going to alter some of the things put in place by the Infantry Combat Overhaul, like any of these things could be a highlight to what the update is. But we got all of them, and that's pretty significant within itself. Obviously, I'm never going to say no to bug fixes. The one thing I think is missing from this list would be some performance optimization, because with some of the more recent updates, I have seen a little bit of a slowdown in my performance. However, I will say maybe one of the more exciting things, something that I underestimated in terms of how it was going to be implemented, would be the map voting tied to the faction and unit system. Because it gives so much depth to every faction and every unit type. There's a purpose for them, and now they feel more meaningful to be played, especially when they're played well. And of course, there may be some balancing that they need to work on, but I know that you're going to hear a lot of complaints about the vehicle matchups. And just by comparing the vehicle lists side by side, you're going to see some inequalities when it comes to factions versus some factions. However, you have to keep in mind that certain factions have other abilities to help balance this. For example, you may be playing a faction that can set up 2 ATGMs on every fob. Or maybe you're playing a unit type that has better mobility to get infantry, especially anti-tank, in place to help balance some of those vehicle fights. My point is much like the Infantry Combat Overhaul, that OWI is pushing for more teamwork, more effort put into utilizing every asset that the team has together in unison to attack, to defend, and to win a round. And don't forget, you'll need some of that teamwork on the map vote and picking factions. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Let me know your thoughts down below. Be sure to hit the subscribe button, leave a like, and I'll see you guys next time.